There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over you late at night. Not the sudden, imposed silence of someone switching off a television, not the muted hush of a city at 3 in the morning, but something more gradual than that. Something that accumulates at the edges of consciousness while the day loosens its grip, while the obligations and the noise and the small, relentless urgencies of being alive begin to recede. The room grows softer around you. The ceiling holds its breath. The world outside does whatever the world outside does, moving through its enormous, indifferent business without consulting you, and you let it. It is in exactly this kind of quiet that certain ideas tend to arrive uninvited. Not the productive ideas, not the to-do lists, or the problem solutions that can wait until morning with perfect patience. The other ideas, the ones that live in the deeper rooms of you, the ones about whether any of it matters, about where everything is going, about the gap between the life you are living and the one you occasionally catch yourself imagining, about time and loss, and the particular strangeness of being a conscious creature inside a universe that never asked whether you wanted to be here. Most of us push those thoughts aside when the sun is up. We are very skilled at this. We have been practicing since childhood. We have jobs and schedules and conversations and screens full of content, and all of it works together as an elaborate and largely effective system for not sitting too long in the quiet places. The system is not malicious. It is just the way life operates at the speed of daylight. But at night, when the system slows down, those questions have a way of returning to the waiting room of the mind. Unhurried, patient, knowing they will eventually be seen. There is a character in a television show who has decided, or perhaps been forced, to live permanently inside those questions. He does not push them aside during the day because for him there is no reliable day, no schedule, no system. He moves through an infinite multiverse of possibilities, with a portal gun in his coat and a flask of something strong nearby. And wherever he goes, whatever impossible thing he is building or escaping or surviving, the questions come with him. He cannot shake them. He has seen too much, traveled too far, dismantled too many comfortable assumptions about reality to pretend that the easy answers are anything other than what they are. His name is Rick Sanchez. He is a fictional character in the animated series Rick and Morty, created by Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland, and first aired in 2013. He is also, without much exaggeration, one of the most philosophically complex characters in the history of animated storytelling. And tonight, in this long and quiet hour before sleep, we are going to spend some real time with him, not watching him, not recapping what he did in any particular episode. Something slower and more interior than that. We are going to follow the architecture of what he believes, the ideas underneath the ideas, the grief underneath the philosophy, the love underneath the grief. We are going to move through it the way you move through a large, dark house at night, one room at a time, staying in each one long enough to understand what it contains before moving to the next. There is no rush. The point of tonight is not efficiency. The point is to go somewhere interesting before sleep takes you, and to take the long road getting there. Rick Sanchez presents himself to the world, and to the people in his orbit who are often too frightened or too worn down to challenge him, as a nihilist. A fully committed, intellectually rigorous, philosophically consistent nihilist who has arrived at his conclusions through first-hand empirical observation of the universe, and who does not particularly care what you think about those conclusions. He will tell you that nothing exists on purpose. He will tell you that nobody belongs anywhere. He will tell you that everyone is going to die, and that this fact has exactly as much cosmic significance as the falling of a leaf in a forest where nothing is watching. He will tell you all of this with complete composure, and then he will take a drink. And then he will build something impossible in the garage. And then he will come inside for dinner, and the contradiction between what he says and how he lives will hang in the air like something that nobody is quite willing to name. Because here's the thing about Rick Sanchez that everything else in this conversation depends on understanding from the very beginning. Rick Sanchez is not a nihilist in any pure or coherent sense of the word. He is someone who has been so badly hurt by the universe that he has adopted nihilism as a defense mechanism rather than a genuine philosophical position. He wears nihilism the way you wear armor, not because it is comfortable, because it is protective. Because if you have already decided that nothing matters, then the things that were taken from you cannot have mattered as much as they felt like they did. And if they cannot have mattered that much, then the wound is slightly more bearable than it would otherwise be. This is a very human thing to do. It is also, as we will spend considerable time exploring, a very costly thing to do. The show does not hide this from you. It places the evidence right at the surface, where anyone paying attention can find it. His catchphrase, the exuberant-sounding nonsense phrase he shouts periodically with apparent joy, translates from its fictional language as, "I am in great pain, please help me." This is not a secret coded into the background of a single episode for dedicated fans to find. The show tells you directly. The man who performs happiness and freedom and philosophical liberation is announcing his suffering in every syllable of the thing that sounds the most like celebration. He is asking for help in the only language available to him, one that no one around him speaks, and the loneliness of that is enormous when you let yourself sit with it. Tonight we are going to sit with it. We are going to follow the philosophy of Rick Sanchez into its origins, into its contradictions, into the actual thinkers whose ideas most closely resemble what Rick has constructed, and we are going to follow it into the moments when the whole elaborate construction drops and something real and undefended shows through. We will talk about Nietzsche and Camus, and the difference between nihilism and absurdism, and why that difference is not merely academic when you are living it. We will talk about grief as a philosophical problem, not in the abstract but in the specific and human form that it takes when it has been carried for decades without adequate acknowledgement. We will talk about a garage in the suburbs of a dimension that no longer exists, and a man who goes back there sometimes and stands outside a door and listens to a voice that was not quite his wife's and does not go in. But before we do any of that, a small thing. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are right now and what time it is. It does not matter whether you are in the middle of the afternoon somewhere warm, or whether it is deep night and you are under something soft with the lamp turned low. I want to know who is out here. Who is spending their hours with these ideas? And if what we build together here means something to you, please consider subscribing. It costs nothing, and it means that I can keep making things like this for you. For all of you, wherever you are, in whatever darkness or half-light or unexpected quiet you have found for yourself tonight. Now, let us go find Rick. Let us go look at what is really happening inside that enormous, terrible, beautiful, broken mind. To do that properly, we need to start with the question he has organized his entire life around, even while pretending he has already settled it. The question that sits at the bottom of every empty flask, every improvised adventure, every moment of genuine warmth that he wraps in sarcasm so tightly you almost cannot see it. The question is simple, and Rick has been refusing to answer it honestly for a very long time. Does anything matter? The word nihilism has a Latin root, nihil meaning nothing. As a formal philosophical position, it developed most visibly through the work of Friedrich Nietzsche in the 19th century, though its deeper roots run through skeptical traditions stretching back much further. In its modern usage, nihilism is broadly understood as the view that life has no intrinsic meaning, that there are no objective moral truths, that the universe is not organized around any purpose or plan that includes you, and that the frameworks people construct to give meaning to their existence are, at the end of the day, useful fictions rather than genuine discoveries. This is not an easy position to hold. Most people who encounter nihilism as an idea experience it not as liberation but as vertigo. The disappearance of guaranteed meaning is terrifying. It means that the things you have been working toward, the goals you have organized your days around, the principles you have used to evaluate your choices, none of them are written into the fabric of reality by anything outside you. They are choices, entirely and only choices, made by creatures who are temporary and accidental and swimming in a universe that is billions of years old and functionally indifferent to whether they succeed or fail. Rick Sanchez has not merely encountered nihilism as an idea. He has confirmed it empirically. He has traveled to infinite realities and verified, firsthand, that there is no version of events in which the universe has a plan that includes you. He has seen the Earth from distances that make it invisible. He has visited civilizations millions of years more advanced than humanity and found them grappling with the same questions humanity has always grappled with, which is to say, he has found that intelligence does not solve the problem. It just makes the problem visible with greater clarity. He has watched his own death in various configurations across various realities, and come back from each of them with the same essential conclusion. The fact that it did not happen this time does not mean it does not eventually happen everywhere. The house always wins. The boulder always rolls back down. And he lives like a nihilist, on the surface. He treats moral codes as the aesthetic preferences of people who have not had the courage to think their way through to the end. He assigns no special weight to human life, or to the life of any species he encounters, in the sense that he does not operate from a prior commitment to preserving it. He burns bridges with extraordinary ease. He abandons dimensions the way you might abandon a car in a parking lot when you realize it is more trouble than it is worth. He performs the philosophy with a commitment that is, in certain lights, genuinely impressive. But here is the flaw in the performance, and it is a flaw that runs all the way through, invisible from a distance and impossible to miss up close. Rick Sanchez cares. He cares about things so deeply and so completely that the evidence of it is overwhelming when you stop watching the performance and start watching the behavior. He cares about Morty to a degree that has shaped every major decision he has made since the show begins. He cares about Beth in ways he cannot admit, that come out sideways in guilt and in overcompensation, and in the desperate engineering of situations where he can protect her without having to say the word. He cared about Diane so completely that the loss of her has been the organizing grief of his entire existence for decades, the wound that all the philosophy has been built around in order to make it slightly more livable. You cannot be this wounded by loss if nothing matters. The wound requires investment. The grief requires that there was something real at stake. And Rick is, beneath the performance, a man in a state of continuous, unaddressed, decades-long grief for things that mattered to him enormously. A genuine nihilist, someone who has arrived at the position through honest internal reckoning rather than using it as a coping mechanism, would experience the universe's indifference with something closer to equanimity. There would be a kind of stillness at the center of it, a genuine acceptance of the terms. What Rick experiences is not stillness. It is the relentless, barely managed agitation of someone who wants things to be different than they are and cannot find a way to want it less. His nihilism is a very sophisticated coping mechanism, dressed up as a philosophical position. The two things look similar from the outside, which is part of what makes Rick so convincing. He delivers the arguments with such intelligence, such fluency, such apparent conviction that it is easy to take them at face value, and the people around him generally do. Beth admires the certainty. Morty internalizes the worldview gradually, which the show consistently presents as damage rather than education. Jerry is too intimidated to push back. Even external characters, from alien governments to interdimensional councils, accept the performance of invulnerable cynicism at face value. Only a few people ever look beneath it. Dr. Wong, the therapist from the Pickle Rick episode, is the clearest example, and we will spend a great deal of time in her office later in this conversation, because she says things about Rick that no other character in the show has managed to articulate so precisely. But there are others. Unity, the hive mind he loves and loses in one of the show's most unexpectedly devastating episodes. Birdperson, his oldest friend, who has known Rick long enough to understand that the armor is armor, and perhaps Morty himself, who has watched the performance at close range for long enough to suspect that what is underneath it is something he would recognize. The philosopher Albert Camus, writing in Paris in 1942, made a distinction that is enormously useful for reading Rick. Camus separated nihilism from what he called absurdism, and the separation is not just semantic. Nihilism, in Camus' reading, takes the meaninglessness of the universe as its conclusion, and then draws from that conclusion the inference that nothing is worth doing, including, at the extreme end, the continuation of life. It is a position that ends in surrender. Absurdism, by contrast, takes meaninglessness as its starting point and refuses to allow it to be a conclusion about anything. The universe is meaningless, yes. The human desire for meaning is real, yes. The collision between those two facts is the absurd, and it cannot be resolved, and it cannot be escaped, and the only honest response to it is to remain inside the tension without blinking. To continue living, not because the universe endorses it, but because the refusal to continue is also a surrender, and you are not that. Rick lives something that functions more like Camus' absurdism than like nihilism, even though he would never use that word and has clearly not read Camus with any sympathy. He keeps going. He does not stop. He does not surrender the adventures or the relationships or the moments of warmth, however reluctantly those moments arrive. He keeps showing up, in the garage, in the ship, in the life of the family upstairs. He says nothing matters, and then he makes sure nothing catastrophic happens to the people he loves, one impossible engineering problem at a time. This is not the behavior of someone who believes nothing matters. This is the behavior of someone who has decided to act as though nothing matters because the alternative, acknowledging what actually matters to him, is too dangerous, too exposing, too likely to end in the kind of loss that has already happened once and that he does not have the resources to survive a second time. The nihilism is the mask. The question we are moving toward, the one this whole long night is circling around, is what is the face underneath it? We know the beginning of the answer. We know the ghost that lives at the center of everything Rick has built. Her name was Diane. Most television shows introduce their central characters' backstories in a conventional way. You get an early episode flashback, you get an expository conversation, you get a scene that is clearly designed to tell you the thing the writers want you to understand about why this person is the way they are. The information is delivered at a pace that the audience can comfortably receive, and once received, it slots neatly into the understanding of the character. Rick and Morty did not do this with Rick. Instead, the show spent years depositing fragments of his history across seasons like pieces of an incomplete mosaic, a line here, an implication there, a moment of unguarded expression that lasts maybe 2 seconds before he catches himself and covers it with something dismissive. The full picture assembled itself slowly, across years of watching, and the effect of that gradual revelation was something that a more conventional approach could not have produced. You understood Rick's wound before you understood the wound's origin. You could feel the shape of what was missing long before you knew what it was. The origin, when it finally arrived, confirmed everything the fragments had suggested, and it was devastating in its specificity. There was a man, younger than the Rick we know, before the gray and the drinking and the resignation that has settled into the lines of his face. A man working in a garage, which is the detail that carries a particular weight when you realize it is the same garage he comes back to in the present, in a different dimension but with the same essential meaning. The same smell of oil and cold air and something being built. A man who was brilliant and difficult and not yet the fully armored version of himself that the show would eventually introduce us to. There was a woman, his wife, Diane. A detail the show gives us in the form of a warmth that is present for only moments before it is taken. She is described in fragments across episodes as intelligent, as capable of keeping pace with Rick's extraordinary mind, as someone who chose a life with him not despite who he was but because of it. In the brief glimpses the show provides, she carries the same quality that Rick's most guarded moments reveal in him, something alive and searching and genuine underneath the surface of things. There was a small girl, Beth, who will grow up to be the complicated, surgeon-trained, emotionally conflicted woman the show introduces in the present day. Small and unknowing and safe, in the way that children in ordinary afternoons do not yet know they are safe, because the concept has not yet become relevant. And then there was another Rick, a version of Rick Sanchez from a different dimension, the one the show would eventually call Rick Prime, who arrived at the garage one afternoon with a portal gun and an offer. The technology of interdimensional travel, the capacity to go anywhere, see anything, live outside the constraints of any single reality. He held it out like a gift. Our Rick said no. He looked at the garage, at the woman in the house, at the small girl in the yard, and he said no. He chose the ordinary thing. He chose the life he had over the infinite alternatives being offered. This is the moment that everything depends on. This is the hinge on which the entire history of Rick Sanchez turns. Because the other Rick, the one who was refused, did not accept the refusal gracefully. He came back. And he dropped something from the sky. A bomb, precise and catastrophic, that killed Diane and killed Beth in an instant that Rick was not there to stop and could not retroactively change and cannot, even with a portal gun that accesses infinite dimensions, undo. Because the specific dimension, the specific morning, the specific woman and child in that specific yard are gone. There are versions of them in other realities, infinitely many, but the ones he loved are gone in the way that the specific is always irretrievably different from the parallel. This is the foundational trauma. Everything that Rick Sanchez is in the present day of the show is downstream of this. The drinking is downstream of it. The nihilism is downstream of it. The refusal to form lasting attachments, the pattern of building relationships halfway and then engineering reasons to leave before they can become the thing that gets taken from you, the extraordinary speed with which he will abandon a dimension or a situation or a person when the emotional stakes get too high, all of it traces back to the morning that the other Rick came back and the bomb fell. Think about what that moment teaches. At a deep, pre-rational level, You choose the love over the adventure, and the love is destroyed by the adventure anyway. The safety is an illusion. The warmth of an ordinary afternoon, the smell of something cooking, the sound of a small girl in the yard, none of it is actually protected by your presence in it. The universe can reach in and take it without warning, without reason, without ceremony, and the fact that you were there and chose it and wanted it is not a shield against anything. Choosing love is not a protection. It is just a different kind of exposure. From this wound, the philosophy grows. If nothing is actually protected by your caring for it, then caring is not a prudent strategy. If love does not insulate you from loss but only determines what you will lose, then the rational response is to minimize the attachments and minimize the losses. You can still move through the world. You can still build things and destroy things and experience everything the universe has to offer. But you do it from behind a wall that nobody can get close enough to demolish. This is the structure Rick builds after Diane. This is what the nihilism is for. It is not a philosophical position arrived at through disinterested inquiry. It is a grief response that has been running so long it has begun to look like a worldview. He also, and this is the part of the story that the show handles with particular care, spends years hunting for the Rick who did it. Decades, crossing the multiverse systematically, locating and eliminating alternate versions of Rick Sanchez in a search for the specific one responsible. This hunt is the single most contradictory thing Rick does in the entire show, and the contradiction is the point. You do not spend decades on a revenge quest for a death that did not matter to you. You do not grieve with that kind of fury and that kind of persistence for a person whose loss you have philosophically rationalized as inevitable and therefore appropriate. The hunt for Rick Prime is Rick's nihilism consuming itself from the inside. It is the proof, written in the behavior rather than the philosophy, that the loss of Diane was not, and never has been, something he accepted. He has told himself he accepted it. He has told the universe he accepted it, performing his indifference on the stage of infinite dimensions. But the hunt says otherwise. The hunt says that somewhere underneath all the carefully constructed architecture of not caring, Rick Sanchez has been carrying a grief so enormous and so unprocessed that it drives decades of action without ever being acknowledged as what it is. There is also the detail of the house. In what is perhaps the single most heartbreaking piece of world-building in the entire show, we learn at some point that Rick has returned to his original dimension, the dimension where Diane was killed, the one that no longer contains anyone he knows. He has built an artificial intelligence in the house that can simulate her voice, not as a comfort, not as a way of preserving something, as a punishment. The AI is designed to call to him from the next room, her voice drifting through an empty house, asking where he is, asking him to come in, the sound of a life that was taken reaching through the walls of a house that stands as both monument and accusation. He goes back there sometimes. He stands outside. He listens. He does not go in. This is penance. This is the behavior of a man who cannot forgive himself for surviving something that should have been stopped, for choosing the wrong thing to do with his day, for being in the garage working instead of being somewhere that might have changed the outcome. The intellectual framework of nihilism tells him that the loss was cosmically meaningless. The behavior in that empty house tells you everything the framework is trying to suppress. Grief is one of the oldest and most unresolved philosophical problems. Every major tradition of thought has had to find some accommodation with it. The Stoics counseled the preemptive release of attachment, the training of the mind to receive the loss of anything without being undone by it. The Buddhists developed a similar discipline around the impermanence of all things, the understanding that nothing is yours to keep, and that accepting this in advance is the path to a kind of peace. The existentialists said that grief is the necessary price of authentic engagement with life, that the capacity to be destroyed by loss is the same capacity that makes love real in the first place, and that you cannot have one without accepting the other. Rick has tried all of these approaches, in his way, and none of them has worked. The Stoic detachment is the posture he maintains most consistently, and it has failed him every time the real feeling breaks through. The Buddhist impermanence is something he understands intellectually and cannot embody emotionally. The existentialist embrace of vulnerability is the one he is furthest from, because it requires exactly the admission that the nihilist armor was built to prevent. There is no philosophically tidy way to carry what Rick is carrying. There never is. Grief resists the frameworks we build around it. It finds the gaps and it seeps through, and the longer it goes unacknowledged, the more it shapes everything around it, until the whole life has been organized around a wound that its owner has not yet been able to look at directly. Rick has been building around his wound for a very long time. The whole universe he operates in, the philosophy and the technology and the relationship structures, and even the central finite curve that walls off the parts of reality he cannot manage, all of it is the monument and the management of a single loss that happened on an ordinary afternoon in a garage, in a dimension that is now gone. This is where we need to go next, into the philosophers whose ideas Rick's life most closely resembles, starting with the one he most clearly inhabits, even if imperfectly, even if unwillingly, even if he would probably roll his eyes at the suggestion. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in Prussia in 1844, the son of a Lutheran minister who died young, and he grew up to become one of the most influential and most misread philosophers in the history of Western thought. He died in 1900, having spent the last decade of his life in a state of mental collapse that his biographers and interpreters have debated ever since, though the cause remains uncertain. He was a man who burned at an extraordinary temperature while he was burning, producing books that read like they were written by someone in direct confrontation with the limits of what a mind can hold. He is famous, most commonly and most reductively, for the phrase "God is dead." This is usually treated as a triumphant declaration, the atheist philosopher announcing the death of the divine with satisfaction. But the context of the full passage from The Gay Science, published in 1882, makes it clear that Nietzsche was not triumphant. He was alarmed. He was describing the collapse of a structure that had organized Western civilization for centuries, and he was asking, with genuine urgency, what comes after? If the divine source of meaning is gone, where does meaning come from? If the moral codes that derive their authority from God are no longer grounded in anything external, what keeps them standing? If the framework is gone, what do you build in its place? These are not rhetorical questions. Nietzsche took them seriously enough to spend his entire writing life trying to answer them. The answer he arrived at, in its most famous form, is the concept of the Übermensch, the overman or the superman, terms that carry cultural connotations from the 20th century that Nietzsche did not intend and would have likely found horrifying. The Übermensch is not a tyrant. Nietzsche hated tyranny. He was contemptuous of nationalism and dismissive of the kind of crude power worship that would later misappropriate his ideas. The Übermensch is something more internal and more demanding than any of those misreadings suggest. The Übermensch is the person who has understood that the external grounding of value is gone, has sat with the full weight of that understanding, and has found a way not just to survive it but to thrive inside it, not by replacing the lost God with another convenient fiction, not by collapsing into nihilism, which Nietzsche considered a failure of nerve, but by creating values from within, from the deepest and most honest understanding of what it means to be the specific person you are, and living by those values with complete commitment and complete clarity. This is an enormously demanding standard. It requires what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate, the capacity to embrace your existence completely, not just the pleasurable and successful parts, but the suffering and the failure and the loss, to say yes to all of it, to will its eternal return. His thought experiment of the eternal recurrence asks you to imagine that your life will repeat exactly as it has been, every moment, forever, and to ask whether you can affirm that, whether you can look at every choice you made and everything that happened, and every cost of being the person you are and say yes, again. I choose this, again. Rick Sanchez is in many ways the most Nietzschean character in popular culture. He has constructed his own values, or the negation of values, entirely from his own interior. He operates without reference to external authority. He is contemptuous of social convention, legal systems, religious frameworks, and any moral code that did not originate in his own reasoning. He is exceptional by any standard the multiverse has yet produced. He has confronted the death of meaning directly, without looking away, without reaching for the comfort of a replacement framework. He talks about the universe's indifference with the weary familiarity of someone who has confirmed it personally across infinite realities. But Rick is not the Übermensch. He is something more tragic. He is the person who glimpsed what the Übermensch requires, and who failed at the hardest part of it. Because the hardest part of Nietzsche's project is not the intellectual confrontation with meaninglessness. Rick can do that before breakfast, with his left hand, while nursing a hangover. The intellectual capacity is simply not the challenge for someone of his extraordinary mind. The hardest part is the amor fati, the genuine, complete, unhesitating embrace of your existence, including the loss of Diane, including the guilt of surviving, including the knowledge that the woman in the yard and the small girl beside her were alive and then were not, and that the specific afternoon when this happened was an afternoon on which Rick was in the garage rather than beside them. Can Rick Sanchez look at his life and say yes? Can he say again? Can he say, I would choose this again? The love and the loss both? The ordinary afternoon and the bomb both? Everything that followed from those first moments of attachment to a woman who was intelligent enough to love him and brave enough to stay? He cannot. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Nietzsche was very clear that the eternal recurrence is not a test you can pass by understanding it intellectually. It is not a thought experiment that rewards the right answer. It is a challenge that you meet or do not meet in the way you actually live, in whether you are, in the moment of your daily choosing, someone who is affirming their existence or someone who is running from it. Rick is, in his daily living, running from his existence as fast as the portal gun will carry him. The philosophy says he has accepted the terms. The behavior says he is still negotiating. There is another Nietzschean concept worth sitting with here. Nietzsche wrote at length about what he called ressentiment, a French word he used to describe a specific pattern of psychological response to difficulty that he considered one of the great moral failures available to human beings. Ressentiment is not simply resentment in the ordinary sense. It is the transformation of your own pain and weakness into a moral framework that judges the people and circumstances that cause the pain. It is the move from I have been hurt to therefore the thing that hurt me is evil and the value system that produced it is wrong. It is reactive rather than creative. It builds itself out of negation rather than out of affirmation. Rick's nihilism has the structural properties of ressentiment. The universe hurt him catastrophically. His response was to construct a worldview that negates the universe's claim to produce anything meaningful. Not to create new values in the Nietzschean sense, but to destroy the category of value entirely. This is not the response of the Übermensch. This is the response of someone who has been wounded, and who has found that wound a convenient foundation for a philosophy that keeps them from being wounded in the same way again. The real Nietzsche, the Nietzsche who gets past the misreadings and the misappropriations, was asking for something much more difficult and much more beautiful than what Rick has managed. He was asking for the strength to love the specific life you have, including its most devastating contents, without the consolation of any external guarantee that the love is warranted. He was asking you to be the source of your own meaning, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a practice of living. Rick knows this is what is being asked of him. He knows it so well that he has built an escape from it that spans multiple dimensions. That brings us to the philosopher who, I think, comes closest to describing what Rick Sanchez actually is. Not what he aspires to, not what he performs, but what he actually is in the most honest reading of his behavior. His name was Albert Camus, and his ideas are going to land very differently in this quiet hour than they would in the middle of the day. Albert Camus was born in Algeria in 1913, a subject of French colonial rule, the son of a mother who was functionally deaf and largely illiterate, and a father who died in the first weeks of the First World War when Camus was not yet a year old. He grew up in poverty, raised largely by his grandmother, in conditions that would have made the subsequent achievement of his intellectual and literary life remarkable, even without the additional weight of what he eventually had to say. He contracted tuberculosis as a young man, a disease that would recur throughout his life and that seems to have given him a particular relationship with mortality, not the abstract cosmic mortality that most philosophers invoke, but the intimate and physical and terrifyingly specific mortality of a body that has already begun, in certain lungs and certain cells, to negotiate with its own ending. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957 at the age of 43. He died 3 years later in a car accident on a road in southern France, a passenger in the vehicle of his publisher and friend. He was 46. He had not finished what he was saying. His most famous philosophical essay is called The Myth of Sisyphus, published in 1942, in the middle of a world war, in an occupied city, under conditions that gave the question of whether life is worth living an immediacy that most philosophical inquiry does not have to contend with. The essay opens with what Camus calls the only truly serious philosophical problem: whether to continue living when life's meaning cannot be guaranteed. He takes this seriously in the way that only someone who has looked at the genuine possibility of its negative answer can take it seriously. Sisyphus is the figure from Greek mythology who was condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a steep hill and watch it roll back to the bottom, and to push it up again, and to watch it roll back again for eternity. No completion, no arrival. No resolution of the effort into anything permanent. Just the pushing and the rolling back and the pushing again, forever, in a universe that had decided this was his fate and was not interested in his feelings about it. Camus used this image to describe what he called the absurd, which he defined with specific precision. The absurd is not simply the difficult or the painful. It is the collision between two specific things: the human desire for meaning, for coherence, for a universe that responds to our need for purpose, and the universe's absolute silence in the face of that desire. We want things to add up. We want our suffering to produce something. We want the equation to balance in some ledger that someone is keeping. And the universe offers, in response to this entirely reasonable and entirely human desire, nothing at all. Not a rejection, not a refusal. Just silence. Indifference so complete it does not even register our asking. This collision, Camus said, cannot be resolved. You cannot eliminate the human desire for meaning because it is constitutive of what you are. You cannot get the universe to produce meaning because it does not have that in its nature. The tension is permanent. The absurd is the permanent condition of conscious life in an indifferent cosmos. His essay asks what you do from there. He names 3 possible responses, of which he accepts only one. The first is literal suicide. If nothing is guaranteed, if the effort leads nowhere, if Sisyphus pushes forever without arrival, then why continue? The logic is internally consistent. Camus takes it completely seriously. And then he says it is wrong. Not because life is secretly meaningful in some way that rewards patient searching, but because suicide is not a solution to the absurd. It is an evasion of it. It removes the person from the equation instead of addressing the equation. It is, in Camus' terms, a surrender. The second is what he calls philosophical suicide, which is the retreat into a belief system that promises to resolve the tension. Religion, in the most obvious case, but also any sufficiently totalizing ideology, any system that guarantees meaning from the outside, that tells you the boulder is going somewhere important even if you cannot see it, that there is a purpose to the pushing, even if the purpose is not visible from your position on the hill. Camus thought this was also wrong, also a form of evasion, because it required what he called a leap into something that the honest examination of reality does not support. It answered the question by refusing to answer it. It purchased comfort at the price of honesty. The third response, the only one Camus endorses, is what he calls rebellion, not revolution, not the transformation of circumstances, something quieter and more internal than that. The refusal to surrender, the insistence on remaining inside the tension without relief. Sisyphus acknowledges that the boulder will always roll back. He does not tell himself otherwise. He does not reach for a comforting framework that promises eventual arrival. He picks the boulder up. He pushes it. He reaches the summit and watches it roll back down. And then he turns around and walks back down the hill to begin again. And Camus says something that has stayed with readers for 80 years. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not relieved, not numb, not resigned in the defeated sense, happy in the specific, clear-eyed, unsentimental sense of someone who has fully accepted the terms of their existence and is choosing to live inside those terms without flinching, who has found in the act of continuing, in the stubborn refusal to let the absurdity win, something that functions as meaning even though it was not handed down from anywhere, a meaning created in the choosing rather than received from the outside. Now apply this to Rick Sanchez. Rick is Sisyphus. There is almost no way to read his life structure otherwise. He has confronted the absurd directly, through 60 years of empirical exploration of a universe that has shown him, in infinite detail, that it has nothing to say in response to human questions about purpose. He has had everything that might have given his boulder a permanent destination destroyed in a single catastrophic moment. He pushes something in every episode, builds something, solves something, escapes something, and at the end, it resets. The next problem assembles itself. The next crisis arrives. The boulder rolls back down. And he keeps going. This is the part that is easy to miss inside the noise of his performance. He keeps going, morning after morning, adventure after adventure, crisis after crisis. He gets up and he pushes. He does not stop. He does not surrender. He does not, for all his demonstrations of philosophical indifference, actually stop caring enough to stop. He is still there, still building, still fighting, still dragging Morty through portals and insisting on the family dinner and engineering the impossible solution. This is absurdist behavior. This is Sisyphus behavior. This is the refusal to surrender wrapped in an extremely convincing performance of indifference. But there is the gap between Rick and Camus' ideal, and it is the gap that this whole conversation is really about. Camus' Sisyphus is happy because he has made peace with the terms. The key word is peace, not defeat, not resignation, not the dead-eyed acceptance of someone who has given up on things being different. Peace in the sense of genuine accommodation. Sisyphus pushes without resentment. He is not fighting the absurdity. He is not trying to escape it or deny it or numb himself to it with a flask of something amber-colored. He has looked it in the face and said, fine, this is what we have. Let me be entirely inside it, fully present, without pretense. Rick has not made that peace. He is still fighting the terms. He wants the boulder to stay at the summit. He wants Diane back. He wants the universe to have been organized differently. He wants to not be the man who was in the garage when the bomb fell. He wants the grief to be smaller than it is. And since it is not smaller than it is, he builds elaborate philosophical structures to make it look like nothing, which is not the same as making peace with it. He is also, in Camus' specific vocabulary, in the middle of a philosophical suicide. His nihilism, the consistent and practiced position that nothing matters and meaning is a delusion, is exactly the kind of totalizing belief system that Camus identified as an evasion of the absurd. It does not maintain the tension. It resolves the tension by eliminating one of its poles. If nothing matters, the desire for meaning becomes an error to be corrected, rather than a real and ineradicable feature of consciousness. The absurd disappears because you have simply refused one side of it. This is the escape Rick has engineered. Not through religion, which he finds beneath contempt, not through ideology, which he is too intelligent to find convincing, but through nihilism, which is sophisticated enough to pass for courage, for intellectual honesty, for the kind of hard-eyed clarity that only truly brilliant people can maintain. It looks like he has faced the hard truth and accepted it. What he has actually done is use the hard truth as an excuse to avoid a harder one. The harder truth is that he loves people and is terrified of losing them, that the universe does not endorse that love or protect it, but that the love is real anyway, that the absurd, as Camus understood it, is precisely this combination, the realness of the love and the absence of any guarantee protecting it, that the only honest response is to love anyway, fully and without protection, not because the outcome is assured, but because the love is the thing that you are, and to stop it would be its own kind of death. Rick knows this. In his very best moments, the ones that break through the performance when he is not paying close enough attention to suppress them, Rick lives this. The love is there. It has always been there. The philosophy was built around it, not to express it but to contain it, to make it smaller than it is, to keep it from being the thing that undoes him the way losing Diane undid him. Camus would recognize this immediately. He would also say something quietly devastating. You cannot maintain the absurd, honest response by pretending the love is a chemical reaction. You can only maintain it by accepting that the love is real and the loss is possible, and the choice to love anyway is the only authentically human choice available to you. Rick has not made that choice yet. Every episode is the possibility of it. Every moment of unguarded tenderness with Morty is the edge of it. He keeps almost arriving at it, and then opening a portal and leaving before it can settle into something he cannot take back. That is the Camus problem. And it lives in the garage at midnight, in the silence between one adventure and the next, in the moment just before the drinking starts. Pascal wrote in the 17th century that all of humanity's problems stem from a single source, the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He meant this as an observation about distraction, about the human preference for motion and noise over the uncomfortable internal silence where honest reckoning lives. He meant it as a gentle diagnosis of a universal condition. But for Rick Sanchez, it is not a gentle observation. It is the exact center of who he is and what is wrong with him. Rick cannot sit quietly in a room alone. Or rather, Rick can do it. He clearly has the capacity, the intelligence, and the self-sufficiency to exist in his own company for extended periods. What he cannot do is sit quietly in a room alone without the room becoming unbearable, without the silence filling up with the things he has spent decades learning to outrun, without the absence of motion becoming an invitation for the grief and the guilt and the honest questions that he has been evading with extraordinary creativity since the bomb fell in the yard. The portal gun is the physical embodiment of this inability. It is the most advanced avoidance mechanism in the history of any multiverse anyone has ever explored. Every time the room gets too quiet, Rick opens a portal and leaves. Every time the emotional stakes of a situation rise to the point where genuine vulnerability might be required, he finds a way out of the situation. Every time the conversation approaches the territory where honest admission might occur, he deflects into a joke or a dismissal or a demonstration of his intelligence that redirects the room's attention from him to the problem. His intelligence, which is the most extraordinary thing about him by any metric available, serves this function above all others. It is not primarily a tool of discovery, though it discovers extraordinary things. It is not primarily a tool of protection, though it protects the people he loves. It is primarily a tool of escape. The same mind that can engineer solutions to problems that entire governments cannot address is the mind that can generate, on demand, the perfectly calibrated argument for why staying in this room a moment longer is not necessary. The perfectly calibrated joke that ends the moment before the moment becomes real. This is what Dr. Wong identifies in the therapy scene. She says something that is so precise and so accurate that even Rick, who has a response for everything, does not immediately have one. She says that his intelligence and the sickness destroying his family are connected by a single thread. Everyone in the family, Rick included, uses intelligence to justify sickness. He alternates between seeing his mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. And the reason for that alternation is that the only truly unapproachable concept for him is that his mind is within his control, that the choices are his, that the escape routes he has built are not the architecture of a man who has no other options. They are the architecture of a man who has chosen, continuously and deliberately and with great sophistication, to prioritize escape over presence. This is the thing about intelligence that the show understands and represents with unusual honesty. Intelligence does not solve the problem of being human. It does not generate peace. It does not produce acceptance. It does not make grief smaller or love less complicated or the fundamental terror of loss any easier to carry. What it does, in the hands of someone as gifted as Rick Sanchez, is make the management of those things into a far more elaborate and far more convincing performance than most people can sustain. Rick understands every element of his own psychological situation. He could, if pressed, produce a more accurate clinical analysis of his own dysfunction than any therapist who has ever been assigned to his case. He knows the mechanism of the drinking. He knows the structure of the avoidance. He knows how the abandonment of Beth produced the Beth that now stands in front of him, complex and damaged and desperate for his approval, in ways that break his heart when he allows himself to look at it directly. He knows all of this. And then he pours himself another drink. Because understanding is not the same as healing. Diagnosis is not the same as treatment. You can know everything about the nature of your wound and still be bleeding, and in certain types of very intelligent people, the knowing becomes itself another layer of protection against the actual work of healing, because the knowing is something you can do alone, in your head, without the vulnerability of acknowledging the wound to anyone who might then see it. Rick has spent decades understanding himself very well and healing himself not at all. This is not unique to him. There is a certain kind of mind, recognizable across many different types of people, that uses its own analytical capacity as a buffer against experience rather than an aid to it. The capacity to describe the emotion becomes a substitute for having the emotion. The capacity to explain the behavior becomes a substitute for changing it. The intellectual framework becomes a house you live in rather than a tool you use, and the house is very comfortable and very well constructed and keeps the weather out entirely. Rick's house is the most elaborate and most beautiful one of this kind that fiction has ever produced. And he has been living in it for 60 years, and the weather outside has not changed, and Diane is still gone, and the garage at midnight still smells like oil and cold air, and something being built, and the questions he has been running from have been waiting all this time with the patience of things that have nowhere else to be. Nietzsche wrote about the specific danger of the man of great gifts who turns those gifts against himself. The person whose intelligence is great enough to construct the very best possible justifications for whatever they need to believe. The danger is that the justifications are convincing, even to the person who constructed them, especially to that person. Rick has convinced himself of his nihilism so thoroughly and over such a long period that there are probably moments when he genuinely believes it, when the performance and the position have become indistinguishable even in his own interior. But then something happens. Morty is threatened, or Beth reaches for something and is hurt, or the AI voice in the empty house calls from the next room. And the genuine thing floods back in, overwhelming the construction. And for a moment you see the man underneath all the philosophy. The man who chose the ordinary afternoon over the portal gun. Who said no to infinite dimensions because what he had was already worth more than what was being offered. Who learned, in the most catastrophic way possible, that you can make the right choice and still lose everything, and who has been trying to make sense of that ever since. The genius is both the prison and the escape. It is the prison because it has been used to wall off the healing. It is the escape because, without it, there is no managing the situation at all, no protecting the people he loves, no finding the solutions that keep the whole complicated enterprise of the Smith family alive and functional across situations that would destroy an ordinary person. The intelligence is the thing that makes him impossible and the thing that makes him indispensable. The thing that isolates him and the thing that keeps the people he loves safe. He could not have it one way without having it the other way too. That is its own kind of absurdity, and he lives inside it every day. The episode titled Pickle Rick is probably the most famous single episode of the show, and the fame is earned, though for reasons that the meme culture around it has mostly missed. The Pickle Rick meme, the image that spread everywhere and became a shorthand for internet culture's relationship with the show, is the surface of something that runs much deeper. The real reason the episode matters, the reason it has stayed with people who think about the show seriously, is not the pickle. It is the 8 minutes in the therapist's office. But the pickle matters for what it means. Rick transforms himself into a vegetable to avoid attending family therapy. This is presented as funny, and it is funny because the gap between the sophistication of the avoidance and the simplicity of what is being avoided is genuinely comic. The most intelligent being in any universe he has visited has engineered a molecular transformation of his own biological form in order to get out of sitting in a rented office in a strip mall and talking to someone about his feelings. The disproportion is the joke. But the joke is also the exact statement of the problem. The lengths Rick goes to in order to avoid therapy are not evidence of contempt for the process. They are evidence of respect for it. You do not need a nuclear-level escape mechanism for something that does not threaten you. You do not need to transform your entire physical body into a vegetable because you have a mild disagreement with the methodology of therapeutic intervention. You need that level of engineering specifically because some part of you knows that if you sit in that room without it, something real might happen, something you are not ready for, something that would require you to stop running for long enough to feel the weight of what you are carrying. The plan fails. Rick, as a pickle, encounters complications. The details of what follows are absurd and extended and very funny on their own terms, and at the end of all of it, Rick finds himself in Dr. Wong's office anyway, still technically in vegetable form but present. The avoidance has circled back to the thing it was avoiding, the way these things tend to do, because the universe does not actually offer escape from the things that need to be faced. It just offers delay. And then Dr. Wong talks. She does not meet his intelligence with competitive intelligence. She does not try to out-argue him or impress him. She is not intimidated by him, which is itself notable because most people are. She simply looks at what is in front of her and she describes it. She says that the only connection between his intelligence and the sickness destroying his family is that everyone in the family uses intelligence to justify sickness. This sentence lands with the specific weight of something true that has been obvious once said, but impossible to see before it was said. It takes the thing Rick uses as his primary identity, his intellectual superiority, and shows it as a mechanism rather than an achievement. Intelligence that serves sickness is not intelligence transcending the human condition. It is intelligence in the service of the most human failure available, the refusal to heal. She says that he alternates between viewing his mind as an unstoppable force and as an inescapable curse. This is also exactly correct, and the reason it is exactly correct is that both of these views of his mind serve the same function. They position the mind as something external to him, as something he is subject to rather than something he exercises. If the mind is an unstoppable force, he is not responsible for what it does. If the mind is an inescapable curse, he is not responsible for what it does. Either way, the mind becomes the actor and Rick becomes the passenger, which conveniently means that no one is responsible for the choices being made with this remarkable intelligence. And she says the most cutting thing of all. The only truly unapproachable concept for him is that his mind is within his control. He chose to come here. He chose to talk, to belittle her vocation. He chose to become a pickle. He is the master of his own universe, and he is sitting in the evidence of what the master of that universe has chosen to do with the resources available to him. Then she says the line about repair and maintenance and cleaning not being adventures. There is no way to do them so wrong you might die. They are just work, and some people, given the choice between work and dying, would rather die. This is the sentence that carries the most weight when you let it settle. Not because it is metaphorical, because Rick has actually tried to die. The Season 2 episode where Unity leaves him, where the camera lingers on him alone in the garage making something that the angle and the context make unambiguous, that is not a scene the show put in by accident. That is the show telling you what the alternative to the work looks like for Rick. The alternative to sitting with the pain, to doing the boring, unglamorous, non-adventure of actual healing, is the garage at midnight and the device and the decision that would end the performance permanently. He does not do it. Something stops him. Whether it is the residual attachment to Morty and Beth, whether it is some stubborn version of the instinct toward continuation, whether it is simply that the interruption arrives before the decision is complete, we are not told. But the proximity of it is clear, and it tells you everything about how costly his particular approach to his own suffering has become. Dr. Wong does not offer him comfort. She does not tell him it will be all right. She gives him something more valuable than that. An accurate description of what he is doing and what it is costing. She offers him the choice explicitly. Some people do the work. Some people do not. Each of us gets to choose. Rick, characteristically, does not thank her. He leaves without making any visible commitment to change. And later, outside the office, he makes fun of her to Beth, who laughs along in the way that confirms exactly what Dr. Wong said about the family. But something in the office happened. Something that does not resolve by the end of the episode, but that sits there, in the record of what has been said, waiting. The show never follows up on it directly. Rick does not start going to therapy. He does not make a visible turn toward healing. But the Pickle Rick episode is, for my money, the single most philosophically honest thing the show has ever done. Because it names the mechanism. It says, out loud, in clear language, what is actually happening underneath all the genius, and all the adventure, and all the philosophy. It says that the most dangerous thing in Rick's universe is not any alien threat or interdimensional catastrophe. It is the question of whether Rick Sanchez will ever do the simple, boring, unglamorous work of actually facing himself. That question is still open. It was open when the show began, it is open now. There is a piece of lore that the show spent years building toward, introducing it in a single throwaway line in the first season, and then leaving it unaddressed for years, until the Season 5 finale finally brought it into full view. It is called the Central Finite Curve. And once you understand what it is and why Rick built it, you understand something about him that no amount of watching the surface adventures could have told you directly. The multiverse in Rick and Morty is not the true multiverse. It is something smaller. The Central Finite Curve is a barrier, built by Rick and the Council of Alternate Ricks using portal gun technology that was specifically engineered for this purpose, separating a finite subset of all possible universes from the infinite rest of reality. The defining characteristic of the universes inside the curve is specific and revealing. In every single one of them, without exception, Rick is the smartest person alive. Every universe where Rick is not the dominant intelligence has been walled off. Every reality in which something or someone could outthink him has been sealed behind the barrier. The version of infinite reality that Rick moves through, the one that constitutes the entire playground of the show, has been curated. It has been engineered to guarantee that wherever he goes, he is exceptional. It is not the universe. It is a garden. This is the most revealing thing Rick has ever built. More revealing than the portal gun. More revealing than the spaceship. More revealing than any of the impossible inventions he produces, with the casual ease of someone making a sandwich. Because the portal gun and the spaceship and the inventions are the expression of his genius. The Central Finite Curve is the expression of his fear. Think about what this reveals about the man who proclaims that nothing matters and that he has accepted the terms of an indifferent universe with philosophical equanimity. This same man has devoted significant intellectual and physical resources to ensuring that he never encounters a reality in which he is not special, not just safe, not just capable of defending himself and the people he loves, but the singular, most intelligent consciousness in every scenario he visits. He has walled off the parts of reality that do not guarantee this. If you genuinely believed nothing mattered, you would not need the universe to be organized around your superiority. You would move through reality as it is, indifferent to whether you were the smartest presence in any given scenario, untroubled by the existence of dimensions where your genius might not be the ceiling. The need to curate the accessible multiverse so that you are always exceptional is not the behavior of someone who has made peace with the indifference of existence. It is the behavior of someone who is desperately, chronically afraid of being ordinary. And we have to ask, why? Why does Rick need to be the smartest? What is at stake in that need? The answer connects back to Diane and to everything we have spent the earlier parts of this conversation building toward. Rick's intelligence is not just something he has, it is the thing that has replaced the things he lost. When Diane died, when the ordinary afternoon was destroyed, the things that had been giving his existence a shape that he could live in, the love and the family and the chosen commitment to one specific life over infinite alternatives, all of those disappeared in the same blast. What remained was the genius that had been there before any of it and that would be there after, the genius that could not be bombed away. In the aftermath, he built an identity around the one thing that could not be taken. He became, self-consciously and completely, the smartest being in the universe. Not because being the smartest was what he wanted to be before the bomb fell, but because it was the only foundation available to him in the rubble after. And the Central Finite Curve is the physical infrastructure of that identity. It is the guarantee that wherever he goes, the foundation will hold. That the one thing he built his rebuilt self around will always be confirmed. It is, in philosophical terms, his most honest confession, written not in words which he controls with great precision, but in physics which is harder to dissemble through. The confession says, I cannot bear to be ordinary. I have built the structure of reality to prevent it, and I have been calling this freedom. There is also something to say about the ethical dimension of the Central Finite Curve, because it is not just personally revealing, it is morally significant. The universes inside the curve are, by design, universes where Rick is always on top. They are not universes selected because they are good, or because they promote flourishing, or because they represent the best available outcomes for the people living in them. They are selected because in them, Rick is exceptional. The criterion is entirely about him. The billions of people and beings living in those curated realities are there because the selection criterion produced them as a byproduct. They are the background of a stage that was designed for one character. This is the most extreme form of the self-centeredness that runs through Rick's character, and it is also, paradoxically, the thing that makes him sympathetic rather than purely monstrous. Because the Central Finite Curve is not the work of someone who does not care. It is the work of someone who cares in the wrong direction, who has organized the universe around his own wound rather than around the people who share it with him. The scale of the engineering is the scale of the pain. You do not build a multiverse-spanning barrier out of casual ego. You build it out of something much older and much more desperate. Evil Morty destroys it. At the end of the 5th season, a Morty who has decided to think for himself rather than exist as Rick's accessory tears a hole in the curve and escapes into the true multiverse, the one that has not been arranged around any Rick's superiority. And the moment is powerful not just as a plot development but as a philosophical statement. The escape from the curated reality, the willingness to step into a universe where your specialness is not guaranteed, where you might be ordinary, where the outcome is genuinely uncertain, is the thing that Rick has been structurally, philosophically, architecturally unable to do. Evil Morty does it, and his doing it exposes the curve for what it is, not a feat of engineering but a feat of avoidance, the most expensive and most elaborate avoidance mechanism anyone has ever built. A multiverse-sized system for not having to face the possibility of being just a person. Let me tell you about a moment near the end of the 5th season of the show, after the Citadel has been destroyed, and the Central Finite Curve has been breached, and the portal gun no longer works, and the universe has, once again, been reorganized into something Rick did not plan for, and cannot immediately engineer his way out of. Rick sits down next to Morty. Not in the way he usually sits near Morty, which tends to involve him doing something else, building something or explaining something or using the proximity as a background condition for whatever he actually needs to accomplish. He just sits. And there is a quiet between them that is different from the quiet of a scene that is about to be resolved into action or comedy or confrontation. It is the quiet of two people who have been through something enormous together, and who are, for a moment, simply being together in the aftermath. And in that quiet, something is visible that the show has been offering glimpses of across years. The love that Rick cannot say directly. The specific and real affection for this specific person that runs underneath all the manipulation and the using and the complicated conditional nature of how Rick relates to almost everyone in his life. It is there. In the stillness of that moment, in the quality of the quiet, in the way Rick does not leave, it is completely, undeniably there. This is the tender contradiction at the heart of Rick Sanchez. He is a man who has built an entire philosophical architecture around the proposition that caring is a vulnerability and love is a biochemical phenomenon without philosophical significance. And he is also a man who loves with an intensity and a completeness that shows up in everything he does, from the adventures themselves to the way he fights to protect the people in his orbit to the decades of hunting through the multiverse. For the Rick who took Diane, the love has been there the whole time. The philosophy was built around it, not to express it but to contain it, to make it small enough to survive, to keep it from being the thing that undoes him the way losing Diane undid him. He cried once, looking at memories of Morty, just for a moment. And then he said he was allergic to something in the room, and the deflection was so immediate and so practiced that it nearly worked. But the tears were real. The show does not use images to lie to you about what is happening internally in its characters. The tears were the truth, arriving before the defense could get there. And the defense, when it arrived, was the same defense he uses for everything. A joke, a redirect, the claim of an alternative explanation for the genuine thing that just happened. He has been defending against the genuine thing for 60 years. He has become extraordinary at it. But extraordinary defenses do not eliminate the thing being defended against. They just make it harder to see from the outside. The relationship with Morty is the heart of the show and the heart of Rick's philosophical situation. Because Morty represents something that Rick's nihilism cannot account for, cannot contain, cannot reduce to a manageable abstraction. Morty is the proof that the connections are real. Morty is the person whose anxiety and decency and ordinary 14-year-old humanity keep showing up against Rick's polished cynicism and producing something genuine, something that looks like care, even when Rick is working very hard to make it look like something else. And Rick chose Morty. Not from the first moment, not in any simple or uncomplicated way, but over time, through episode after episode of decisions that add up to the same thing. This person matters to me. I am going to do what is required to keep them here. I am going to fight whatever is threatening them, even when fighting it is costly, and even when the cost is visible, and even when someone might notice that the fighting looks an awful lot like love. I choose this specific person, specifically, irreplaceably. He does not say this. Rick Sanchez does not say this. The words do not come out of his mouth in any direct form. They come out sideways, through action, through the protection that is sometimes rough and sometimes questionable in its methods, but that is consistently and unmistakably real. The choice to stay, the choice to return, the choice to be there, year after year, in the garage and in the ship and in the life of the family upstairs, when leaving, would be so much more consistent with the philosophy he has publicly committed to. Rick's relationships with Beth reveal the same structure. He abandoned her as a child, for reasons that trace back to the grief and the guilt and the decision to make himself into someone who does not have anything that can be lost. And then he came back. He showed up at her door and asked to stay. He has been staying ever since, in his way, in the complicated and often damaging way of someone who loves deeply and does not know how to express it without simultaneously protecting themselves from it. He loves Beth the way you love something that was broken on your watch, with a guilt in the love and a tenderness in the guilt that makes the whole thing simultaneously more real and more difficult than uncomplicated love would be. In the moments when he is most honest with himself, the quiet moments, the ones that slip through when the performance is not fully operational, this love is visible everywhere. It is in the way he talks about Diane to Beth, in the rare moments when he talks about Diane at all. It is in the choices he makes when Beth's well-being is genuinely at stake. It is in the offer he makes her in the clone episode, the offer that gives her the freedom he never gave himself, to go and explore and not be constrained by the ordinary life. And that is also, if you look at it from the other angle, his way of telling her she is worth the sacrifice of the relationship he needs her to be part of. The show does something brave and unusual with this. It does not resolve the contradiction, it holds it. Rick does not have a moment of complete opening up where he names everything he has been hiding and the healing becomes uncomplicated and the philosophy transforms into something more functional. The contradiction remains. The love remains underneath the nihilism. The nihilism remains over the love. And in the space between those two things, in the tension that is not resolved but simply held, Rick Sanchez goes on living. This is actually more honest than resolution would be. Most people with these kinds of wounds do not resolve them in dramatic conversion moments. They carry them. They manage them badly and then slightly better and then badly again. They have genuine moments of connection that the wound cannot completely prevent, and then they do the thing the wound requires and the connection retreats. They are in motion, always, between the love and the protection against love. And the motion is what constitutes a life. Rick's life is this motion. All of it. Every adventure and every escape and every moment of unguarded warmth and every sarcastic deflection immediately afterward is this motion. The tender contradiction is not a flaw in the character, it is the character. It is the most honest thing about him. It is late now. Whatever the hour is where you are, the day has put down enough of its weight that you are here, in this quieter space, with these ideas settling around you. If you have been drifting in and out through the last several sections, that is perfectly right. These ideas do not require your full attention to do something with you. They seep in through the edges of consciousness and find places to settle that the fully alert analytical mind would not necessarily choose for them. So let us take the long way to the end. Let us spend some time in the territory that all of this has been building toward. What does Rick Sanchez teach us? Not as an instruction manual, because he is emphatically not that. Not as a life guide or a role model or an example to emulate. But as a mirror, which is what the best characters always are. A mirror has value not because it tells you what you should be, but because it shows you clearly enough what is actually there that you can make an informed choice about what to do with it. Rick holds up a very specific kind of mirror, and the image it offers is difficult and useful in equal measure. The first thing he teaches, or demonstrates, is that intelligence and wisdom are not the same thing, and that the conflation of them is one of the most costly errors available to a certain kind of mind. Rick is the smartest being in every universe he visits. And this intelligence does not protect him from grief, does not generate peace, does not make the loss of Diane smaller, or the loneliness less real, or the nightly hours in the garage less heavy. What it does is make the avoidance of all of these things more sophisticated and more convincing, which is not the same as making any of them go away. This is useful to know because most people who struggle with emotional wounds that have been left unaddressed for long periods have found some version of this, scaled to their own capacities and circumstances. The people who tend to be best at analyzing their own problems are sometimes the people who are worst at solving them, because the analysis has become a substitute for the work of actual change. You can understand the mechanism of your own suffering with great precision and still be suffering. The understanding and the healing are different activities, and the first is not a prerequisite for the second so much as a sometimes companion and sometimes obstacle. Rick is the extreme version of this. He is the demonstration case that shows the pattern at maximum intensity. And watching it at maximum intensity in a character who is otherwise compelling and funny and genuinely brilliant can be a useful way of recognizing the quieter version of it in yourself. The question worth sitting with, not urgently but gently, in this late hour, is whether the understanding you have of your own difficult territory has been keeping you company there or helping you move through it. The second thing Rick demonstrates is something about the relationship between authenticity and suffering. His most authentic moments, the ones where the performance drops and the real thing shows through, are almost always moments of pain. The tears at the memory of Morty, the device in the garage after Unity leaves, the empty house in Dimension C-137, and the voice from the next room. The most honest version of Rick is the most suffering version of Rick, and this creates a terrible incentive structure. He can either be authentic and be in pain, or be defended and be less in pain but less himself. Most of the time he chooses the defense. This is understandable. It is also a choice that has made his life into something smaller than it might otherwise have been. The fullness of what he is capable of, the love and the connection and the moments of genuine presence with the people around him, all of this lives on the other side of the defense. He gets there in fragments, in moments when the engineering fails and the real thing floods through before he can stop it, but he never stays long, and the whole architecture of his existence is organized to ensure that he does not have to. The invitation in this, the thing Rick's story offers that is genuinely useful, is the recognition that the cost of the defense is not just an absence of something nice. It is the active shaping of an existence into something more limited than the person is capable of. The defense is not neutral. It takes something, and what it takes is usually the exact things that would have been most worth having. The third thing, and this is where Camus is most useful, is the distinction between surrender and acceptance. Rick has not accepted his situation. He has surrendered to a version of it that requires less of him than genuine acceptance would. Surrender is the move that says, I cannot bear this, so I will make it not matter. Acceptance is the move that says, this matters enormously, and I am going to remain inside that fact with my eyes open. Surrender produces the nihilism. Acceptance would produce something that looks more like what Camus was describing. The clear-eyed, unsentimental, fully present choice to live inside the difficulty without looking away. This is an enormously demanding thing. Most of us do not manage it, not fully, not consistently. But the difference between aiming for it and aiming for the exit is the difference between a life that is lived at its actual scale and a life that is lived inside the curated version that protects you from the parts of reality you cannot manage. Rick built the Central Finite Curve. Most of us build smaller versions of it, internal rather than architectural, but functionally similar. The places in our understanding of ourselves and our situations that we have walled off because we cannot manage what is on the other side. Noticing the curve you have built is not the same as dismantling it, but noticing is the beginning of a different relationship with it. And in this late, quiet hour, with the day's noise finally receding enough that the larger shapes of things are visible, noticing is available in a way it might not be earlier. The fourth thing is about the specificity of love. Rick's love, the love that keeps showing up despite the philosophy designed to prevent it, is not general. It is not a warm feeling toward humanity. It is specific. Morty specifically. Beth specifically. Diane specifically. The real love is always particular and irreplaceable in a way that directly contradicts the nihilist claim that all versions of things are equivalent. If Rick genuinely believed that this Morty was interchangeable with any other Morty across any infinite number of dimensions, he would not fight the way he fights to preserve the specific Morty he knows. The specificity of the caring is the proof that the love is real in the way that real love is always specific. The love for this person, this one, this irreplaceable version, in this life that cannot be replicated by any parallel version, however close. This is something worth resting in for a moment. The people you love specifically, not in general, not as categories or types, but the actual specific people who have been present in your actual specific life, are the proof against the nihilist argument. Not because they can be used to demonstrate cosmic significance, but because the love you have for them is its own kind of evidence. Not of anything the universe endorses, just of what you are, of the specific, irreplaceable shape of your own interior when it meets the specific, irreplaceable shape of someone you love. Rick knows this. He knows it so well that he has spent 60 years building the most elaborate denial of it in the history of any multiverse. Because if the specificity of love is real, then the loss of the specific thing that was loved is real, and real in a way that no philosophical position can make smaller. He cannot make it smaller. He has tried. He is still trying. The fifth thing, the one I want to leave you with as sleep arrives, is about the choosing. Camus said that Sisyphus must be imagined happy, not relieved, not resolved. Not delivered from his situation by the grace of some external power that has finally decided he has suffered enough. Happy in the specific sense of someone who has turned toward their existence instead of away from it, who has found in the act of continuing, in the stubborn daily choice, to push the boulder rather than abandon the hill, something that functions as meaning whether or not the universe has endorsed it. Rick pushes. Every morning, every adventure, every family dinner, every impossible problem, he pushes. He does not have the happiness Camus describes. He has not made peace with the terms. He is still fighting them. Still running from the room when it gets too quiet? Still reaching for the flask when the silence becomes honest? But he pushes. He keeps going. He chooses, day after day, to be present in the lives of the people he loves in his complicated and often damaging way, rather than to disappear entirely into the multiverse where the complications are endless, but at least they are not these specific ones. The choice to remain is not nothing. It is, in fact, the thing that everything else depends on. Without it, there is no story. Without it, there is no Morty growing up, however messily, inside the experience of being chosen by someone extraordinary and difficult. There is no Beth having the complicated, painful, real relationship with her father that is at least a relationship rather than an absence. There is no garage at midnight, no impossible invention, no family dinner with too much tension and too little honesty, but at least the presence of people who matter to each other in the room. Rick remains. For all the philosophy about nothing mattering, for all the portal gun and the escape routes and the curated multiverse and the 60 years of expertly engineered avoidance, Rick remains. Maybe that is the thing. Maybe that is the answer the show has been building toward all this time, not through any single dramatic declaration, but through the accumulation of presence. The choosing to stay, the choosing to push, the choosing to love in the only way available to someone who is this frightened of loving, which is sideways and poorly, and with enormous caveats and genuine damage along the way, but real, always underneath everything, stubbornly real. One must imagine Rick Sanchez, if not quite happy, then at least present. Still here. Still building. Still choosing, in his way, the people he cannot admit he loves over the infinite alternatives that would ask nothing of him. Still pushing the boulder? And maybe, in the end, that is what the philosophy of Rick Sanchez really is. Not the nihilism he performs, not the absurdism he lives without quite owning, but the simple, stubborn, philosophically unadorned fact of someone who keeps going even when the going is hard, who keeps choosing connection even when connection is dangerous, who keeps being here when here is the hardest place to be. The universe did not give him a reason to stay. He found one anyway. He keeps finding it. In the garage, in the ship, in the quiet moments with Morty, in the complicated love for a daughter he abandoned and came back to, in the AI voice in the empty house that he listens to from the other side of the door. In all of it, the mess and the brilliance and the grief and the love that will not be eliminated by the most sophisticated philosophy anyone has ever produced. He stays. You have come to the end of something long. This was not meant to be efficient. It was meant to be the kind of conversation that belongs in the late hours, the kind that moves at the pace of thought rather than the pace of information delivery. If you found something in it that will stay with you, I am glad. If you found yourself drifting somewhere between the ideas and sleep, that was also the right use of this time. Leave a comment if you want to tell me where you are watching from and what hour it is there. I genuinely want to know. There is something that feels important about the geography of the people who are out here with these ideas in the dark. If this is the kind of thing you want to find again, subscribing means you will. It is free, and it keeps this going, and this is the kind of thing I want to keep going. Sleep well. The questions will be here when you wake up. So will you? And both of those things are, in whatever way the universe allows for such things, worth something. Good night. There is something worth dwelling on for a moment longer before this conversation fully closes, something that belongs to the fabric of the show itself rather than strictly to the character of Rick, but that is impossible to separate from any honest analysis of what Rick believes and why. The multiverse in Rick and Morty is not just a setting, it is a philosophical argument. Most science fiction uses the multiverse as a device for adventure. Infinite realities means infinite versions of events, infinite variations of history, infinite scenarios for characters to navigate. It is, on the surface, an extraordinarily useful story engine. You can do anything with it. You can tell any kind of story. The possibilities are, as advertised, literally infinite. But the show uses the multiverse in a more specific and more philosophically weighted way than most of its genre companions. In Rick and Morty, the existence of infinite realities is not primarily a generator of adventure. It is the source of a particular and devastating question. If there are infinite versions of every moment, infinite versions of every person, infinite versions of every choice, does any single version of any of these things mean anything? This is the question Rick has been living inside for decades, and it is the question that has shaped his nihilism more than any purely philosophical reasoning could have. He has not simply read about the problem of meaning in an indifferent universe. He has experienced it. He has been to the dimensions where everything is different. He has met the versions of himself who made different choices and lived different lives and arrived at different endings. He has sat with the full empirical weight of the fact that he is not the only version of himself, that Morty is not the only version of Morty, that the life the family is living in the house on the corner of a particular street in a particular dimension is one of an infinite number of such lives, indistinguishable in their cosmic significance from the versions that ended tragically or the versions that never quite began. This knowledge does something to a person. It does something specific and identifiable, and the show has been careful about depicting it honestly, rather than sensationally. The awareness of the multiverse does not make Rick nihilistic in the simple sense of making him not care about anything. It makes him nihilistic in the much more painful sense of making it impossible for him to sustain, without visible effort, the feeling that this particular version of his life is meaningful in a way that transcends the accidental fact of his being in it. Every time Morty does something brave or makes a choice that reveals genuine growth, some part of Rick's mind is computing the infinite number of Mortys in the multiverse for whom this moment never happened, or happened differently, or happened to someone who did not share this particular Morty's specific experience of growing up alongside this particular Rick. Every time Rick feels something real for the family, for Beth, for any of them, the knowledge is there in the background. This moment is one of infinite versions of itself, and the version you are in is distinguished from the others only by the accident of your location in it. Most people are protected from this knowledge. The narrow band of experience available to a human life in a single reality creates a natural, functional illusion of uniqueness. This is your life. This is the only version of it you will ever live. The people in it are the only versions of those people you will ever know. The protection this illusion offers is considerable. It allows the specific to feel significant in a way that the multiverse perspective ruthlessly undermines. Rick has lost this protection. He lost it when he picked up the portal gun, and he has not been able to recover it since. He moves through a universe where the specific and the interchangeable are in constant, unresolvable tension, and the tension has shaped his psychology at a level that is fundamental rather than superficial. It is not that he has decided on philosophical grounds to be a nihilist. It is that the direct experience of infinite alternatives has made the feeling of significance structurally difficult to sustain. And yet he does sustain it. This is the thing that the multiverse perspective cannot quite extinguish, no matter how fully Rick has tried to use it as justification for his philosophical position. He does sustain the feeling that this Morty matters, that this family matters, that the life being lived in this particular dimension, in this particular garage, on this particular night, is the one that warrants his presence and his protection. The multiverse does not actually make him stop caring. It just makes caring feel philosophically indefensible. This is the most honest and most common description of the experience that people sometimes call existential anxiety, the feeling that the things you care about most deeply are arbitrary in some way that makes it difficult to justify the intensity of the caring. That the love you feel for specific people in your specific life is not endorsed by anything outside you, that the choices you have organized your existence around could have been different, were different in some version of events you will never access, and that the fact of their being what they are in your particular version of reality is not proof of their rightness. Rick lives inside this feeling at maximum intensity, with the empirical confirmation of infinite alternatives available to him at any moment through the portal gun. And his response, the nihilist performance and the constant motion, and the refusal to stay in any room long enough to feel the full weight of what he actually cares about, is a very specific and very human response to that experience. Scaled up enormously by his circumstances and his intelligence, but recognizable in its essential structure. The multiverse is the philosophical engine of the show because it makes the question of meaning maximally difficult. It does not simply say the universe is indifferent. It says the specific version of your life that you are living is indistinguishable from infinite others in terms of cosmic significance, and your task, if you are honest, and you are brave, and you are not retreating into the various philosophical or religious or nihilist exits available, is to find your reason for caring anyway. To find the thing that makes this version of the life worth the full investment of your presence, knowing that the investment is not endorsed from outside you, and that the endorsement never will be. This is the task Rick has been failing at, and partially succeeding at and failing at again, for the entire run of the show. And there is something worth saying about why watching this failure and partial success and failure again is so persistently compelling to so many people. It is not because his circumstances are relatable in any literal sense. Almost no one has a portal gun. Almost no one has visited infinite realities. Almost no one is the smartest being in every universe they walk through. But the structure of the difficulty is relatable in a way that transcends the specific circumstances. The question of how to care, fully and specifically and without external endorsement, in a universe that does not return your caring, is a question that lives in ordinary human experience as surely as it lives in Rick's extraordinary one. The scale is different. The portal gun is replaced by much simpler and more available means of escape, but the fundamental shape of the challenge is the same. You are here, in this specific version of this specific life, with these specific people who matter to you in ways you cannot always justify to yourself or to anyone else, and the universe is not confirming that any of it is important? And the question is, what you do with that? Rick keeps choosing to stay, imperfectly, damagingly, with enormous amounts of philosophical noise drowning out the signal. But he keeps choosing to stay. That is the answer the show has to offer. Not a comfortable one, not a tidily resolved one, just the staying, just the continuing, just the choosing, over and over, in the specific way of someone who has not yet found peace but who has found, somehow, that the people in the room are worth one more day of trying. We have talked around Rick's drinking throughout this conversation without going directly to it, and the hour being what it is, the quiet being what it is, the defenses being as low as they get at this time of night, it seems like the right moment to look at it straight. Rick drinks. Constantly, openly, in amounts that would be physiologically impossible for a normal human body to process without consequence. The drinking is present from the very first scene of the show. It is essentially a permanent feature of his existence, as constant as the gray hair and the lab coat and the belching that punctuates his sentences. The show treats it as part of his characterization, sometimes as comic shorthand, sometimes as a window into something much darker. What is the drinking? On the surface, it looks like a personal choice, a preference, a quirk of a character who has decided to operate outside conventional social norms in every area, including the consumption of substances. There is a version of watching Rick that accepts this reading and does not inquire further. Lots of people drink. Some people drink a lot. Rick is unusual in many ways, and his drinking is one of the unusual things about him, filed alongside the portal gun and the genius and the belching as features of the character rather than symptoms of something specific. But the show is not that careless. The show is very deliberate about the drinking, and what it is deliberate about is connecting the drinking to the grief. Not explicitly, not through a scene where Rick looks at a photograph of Diane and reaches for a glass while gentle music plays. More subtly than that, and more honestly. The drinking appears most prominently and most heavily in the moments when Rick is most alone with himself. In the garage at midnight, in the aftermath of something that has stripped away the usual forward motion. In the quieter episodes where the adventure does not fully fill the silence. In the moments that would, for someone without the elaborate escape architecture he has built, require sitting with something. The drinking is the last layer of the system. After the adventure, after the philosophy, after the wit and the sarcasm and the portal gun and all the motion, there is the drinking. The chemical management of whatever gets through the other defenses. The reliable, always available, never requiring anyone else mechanism for making the silence bearable, for blurring the edges of the questions that arrive when everything else has been exhausted. Clinical descriptions of alcoholism in the serious psychological literature consistently identify the same pattern that Rick exemplifies. The use of alcohol as an emotion regulation strategy. The way the substance becomes the primary means by which a person manages experiences that are too intense, or too persistent, or too unresolvable for other strategies to handle. The way the short-term relief it provides gradually becomes indispensable, not because of any simple physical mechanism, but because the person has organized their relationship with their own emotional experience around the availability of that relief. Rick has lost his wife. He has lost his daughter in the original dimension, who was also killed. He has spent decades in a grief that he has never been able to address directly, using every form of intelligence and motion and escape available to him to stay one step ahead of the full weight of it. And when he runs out of road, when the adventure is over, and the portal gun is put away, and the garage is quiet, and the AI voice in the house is the only sound in the empty dimension where he goes when things get bad enough, there is the flask. This is not a character flaw in the sense that it was chosen or cultivated. It is a wound expressing itself through the most available outlet. It is what happens to grief that has been running for 60 years without enough acknowledgement. It finds a way through. It always does. The intelligence cannot prevent it, and the philosophy cannot contain it, and the portal gun cannot outrun it. It just waits, and eventually, in the quiet moments that cannot be escaped, it arrives. And the only management available is the flask. And so the flask is always there. There is a complicated relationship between intelligence and substance use that the show reflects with unusual accuracy, whether intentionally or by the organic logic of a well-observed character. Intelligent people are, by various measurements, statistically more likely to use alcohol and certain other substances than the general population. The reasons for this are debated, but one of the most compelling arguments is the one that applies most directly to Rick. The capacity to think at high speed and high depth is also the capacity to experience the things you are trying not to think about at high speed and high depth. The mind that can solve any problem it faces is also the mind that can generate, in vivid and exhaustive detail, the full texture of the thing it most wishes it could escape. Rick cannot not think about Diane. His mind does not have a low setting. Whatever defenses he has built, whatever philosophical frameworks he has constructed, whatever portal guns and adventures and impossible inventions he deploys to stay ahead of the silence, the mind keeps running. It keeps arriving at the loss, at the guilt, at the questions about what might have been different and what might have been preserved, and whether there is any version of events in any accessible dimension where the morning went differently and Diane is still in the yard and the ordinary afternoon was not the last one. He cannot stop the arriving. He can only manage what happens when it does. And management, in his case, has been the flask and the adventure and the philosophy, all three working together as the most elaborate coping architecture that has ever been built by the saddest genius in any universe. The drinking is not separate from the philosophy. It is part of the same system. The nihilism says the grief is irrational. The drinking manages the moments when the nihilism is not convincing enough. They are different instruments in the same orchestra, all playing the same song, which is a song about a man who loved his wife and cannot put that love anywhere now that she is gone, and is doing everything in his considerable power to keep from having to feel the full weight of that nowhere. Camus ended his argument about Sisyphus with the claim that one must imagine him happy. We have spent time unpacking what that means and why Rick fails to achieve it. But it is worth asking, directly and without evasion, whether there are moments in Rick's life that are genuinely happy. Whether the philosophical apparatus and the grief and the drinking and all the elaborate avoidance ever quiet long enough for something like happiness to get through. There are, and they are, consistently, in the episodes and in the moments where Rick is doing something creative. Not the adventures per se, though the adventures produce a kind of high that functions as a substitute for happiness, and that Rick clearly finds preferable to the alternative. But the building, the inventing, the moments when something that should be impossible according to the laws of any sane physics is becoming possible in front of him, taking shape under his hands in the garage while the night is quiet and no one is asking anything of him. These moments are described in psychology as flow states, a term developed by the researcher Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi to describe the condition of complete absorption in a challenging activity where skill and challenge are precisely matched. In flow, the self-consciousness that normally accompanies experience temporarily dissolves. The internal narrator that runs the ongoing commentary about how things are going quiets. The grief and the questions and the weight of things take a step back. There is just the doing, and the doing is complete. Rick lives for these moments. The building is not incidental to who he is. It is the closest thing to peace that his structure permits. When he is building something impossible, he is temporarily released from the impossibility of his own situation. He is inside the problem rather than inside himself. The intelligence that usually works against him, generating the full texture of the grief and the guilt with terrible efficiency, is pointed outward at something external, and the relief is real and immediate and genuine. This is worth noticing because it is the most benign element of the avoidance system. The adventure and the drinking are escapes with significant costs. The building is an escape that produces something. It gives the world the inventions. It gives Rick the dimension of his character that is most genuinely heroic. Because whatever else is true of him, the things he builds are extraordinary, and the building of them is real. The flow states that the building produces are not nothing. They are as close as Rick gets to the Sisyphean happiness Camus describes, and they matter. They also have limits. They are not available at 3 in the morning in the empty house when the AI voice is in the next room. They are not available in the aftermath of the moments when something breaks through. The defenses and the full weight of what he is carrying arrives all at once. They do not solve the problem. They are a reprieve from it, and the reprieve is real and valuable and worth having. But it is not peace. It is the boulder at the top of the hill for a moment before it starts to roll. Happiness, in the full sense that Camus was reaching for, would require Rick to find a way to be present in his life that does not depend on motion. To be content, even briefly, even sometimes, inside the quiet. To sit in the garage without building something and not experience the quiet as a threat, he cannot do this yet. But the capacity for genuine engagement, for the flow and the building and the moments of real creative absorption, is there in him. It is the part of him that the grief has not entirely claimed, and it suggests that the Sisyphean happiness Camus describes is not, even for Rick, entirely out of reach. The question is whether he will ever stop running long enough for it to find him in the stillness rather than only in the motion. We keep coming back to the garage. Every significant thing in Rick's story has the garage somewhere in it. The first moment of the show is Rick in the garage. The loss of Diane is associated with a garage. The empty house where he goes to punish himself with the AI voice is the house with the garage where he used to work. The adventures begin in Beth's garage. The impossible inventions take shape in Beth's garage. The most private moments of the show, the ones where the performance is lowest and the truth is closest, happen in the garage. This is not accidental. The garage is the image the show has chosen to represent Rick's interior life, and it is worth thinking about what a garage actually is in the architecture of a home. A garage is a liminal space. It is neither fully inside nor fully outside. It is not the living room, the performed space where the family presents itself to itself, where the conversation and the meals and the ordinary life of the household happens. It is not the yard either, the public-facing space where the house presents itself to the neighborhood and the world. The garage is between. It is the space where the things that do not fit anywhere else are kept, where the unfinished projects live, where the work happens that is too messy or too noisy or too private for the main rooms of the house. Rick in the garage is Rick in the space that is neither public nor intimate, not performing for anyone, not quite alone with himself in the way the bedroom or the bathroom would be, working, building, existing in the between. Every inventor and creator knows this kind of space. The studio, the workshop, the corner where the project lives, the place that is yours in the specific sense that it reflects your internal organization, that the way things are arranged there is the way things are arranged in you, that the mess and the order and the half-finished state of everything are all direct expressions of a mind in process. For Rick, the garage is the most honest room in any house he has ever occupied. It is where the nihilism does not perform, and the philosophy does not lecture, and the sarcasm does not have a target. It is where he is just the person who builds things. The person who was in this kind of room when the bomb fell. The person who came back to this kind of room after everything was gone. The person who has been working at the bench in this kind of room for 60 years, building impossible things in the space between inside and outside, between the performed life and the hidden one. The garage is where the questions live. The ones he is not answering in the adventures or the philosophy or the drinking. They live on the workbench alongside the half-finished inventions. They live in the smell of the air and the light of the single bulb. They live in the specific quality of late-night quiet that the garage holds. The kind of quiet that is different from silence, that has texture and weight and memory. When you understand what the garage means, you understand something about why the show keeps returning to it. It is the most honest setting available for a character who is everywhere else performing. In the garage, in the between space, in the liminal room that is neither presentation nor complete privacy, Rick is most nearly himself. Most nearly the person before the philosophy was built. Most nearly the man who stood at the window and watched his wife and daughter in the yard and chose the ordinary afternoon over the portal gun. He keeps going back to the garage. In every dimension, in every version of the life, there is always a garage, and he is always in it, and the questions are always there, and the flask is there too, and the half-finished inventions are there, and somewhere in all of that is the person who still, after all of it, has not stopped building things. Not because building will fix anything, not because the next invention will be the one that makes the grief manageable at last. Just because building is the thing he does. It is the continuity between the man he was before the bomb fell and the man he is now. It is the thread that runs from that ordinary afternoon to this one, through all the dimensions and all the losses and all the philosophy and all the elaborate, gorgeous, heartbreaking avoidance. He builds. He keeps building. And the building is its own kind of answer to the questions he has not yet been able to face directly. That is where we leave him. In the garage, at the bench, the light of a single bulb, the quiet before the next adventure. The questions on the workbench alongside the impossible thing that is slowly becoming possible. Still here, still building, still pushing. There is one final thing worth saying before sleep takes this conversation entirely, and it is something that does not get said often enough in discussions of philosophy or in discussions of difficult characters like Rick, or in discussions of the kind of grief and the kind of questions that arrive in the quiet of late night and refuse to be easily answered. You do not have to resolve it tonight. The philosophy of Rick Sanchez is not a manual for living. It is a portrait of someone who is, in many ways, failing at living in the particular style that he has chosen to fail in. He is brilliant and he is damaged and he keeps going and he loves the people around him in the crooked, insufficient, genuine way that the damage permits. He has not resolved the big questions. He has not made peace with his loss. He has not done the work that Dr. Wong was offering to help him with. He has not arrived at Camus' happiness or Nietzsche's amor fati, or any of the other philosophical destinations that the thinkers we have visited tonight were pointing toward. He is in process. He has been in process for 60 years. And the process is not going faster because the intelligence is extraordinary, or because the experience is vast, or because the philosophical vocabulary is unusually sophisticated. The process goes at the speed it goes. And the speed it goes is the speed at which genuine healing actually moves, which is slower than we would like and less linear than the metaphors of progress suggest. This is permission, not to stay broken, not to give up on the work of healing or the work of being more present or the work of caring more honestly and more directly, but to be where you are tonight, in whatever version of the garage that happens to be your particular late-night space, with whatever version of the questions that are particular to your life, and to not require that any of it resolves before morning. The questions will be there tomorrow. So will you. And that is the beginning of everything. Camus's Sisyphus does not arrive at the top of the hill and find it easier to push next time. The hill is the same. The boulder is the same. The muscles are the same muscles, carrying the same weight, up the same incline. What changes is not the external circumstance, but the internal relationship to it. The choice to push with presence rather than with resentment. To be fully inside the effort rather than somewhere above it, watching from a distance that protects you from feeling the full weight. Rick has not made that choice yet, or he has made it intermittently, in fragments, in the moments when the love breaks through before the defense can stop it, and those fragments are not nothing. They are the things the show is actually about, underneath all the science fiction and the absurdist humor and the philosophy. The moments when the armor is down and the real thing shows. You have spent this late hour with a man who is in process, who is carrying something enormous and managing it imperfectly, who loves people he cannot quite bring himself to tell, and builds impossible things, and keeps going into a universe that has given him every possible reason to stop. And maybe something in that is useful to you, wherever you are, whatever hour it is, whatever version of the questions is waiting in the quiet of your own particular garage. Maybe the useful thing is simply this: the continuing is enough. For tonight, the continuing is enough. Sleep now. The universe will still be there in the morning, indifferent and vast and full of the specific people who happen to be in your particular version of it. So will you? That is the thing that Rick Sanchez, for all his philosophy and all his grief, has managed to teach without meaning to. That showing up imperfect and defended and still carrying the weight of things not yet resolved is the whole point. It is the only point. And it is enough. Good night.